You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, please let me see your ticket stubs for the double-edged double bill. This week we're going back to 1987, the year of Withnail, Real Men, and I. Each week, Adam Thomas and Thomas Mariano will come to the table to discuss the randomly selected yin and yang of a double feature. Then, both will have to pick number between 1 and 10 in order to seal their fates for the next episode. One will have 2 good movies, the other 2 bad ones. Let the chaos begin. I am Thomas Mariani, and I'm blind drunk.
And I am Adam Thomas, and I will take the good package.
Yes. Yes, you will.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But welcome everybody to Double-Edged Double Bill. Every week we talk about 2 movies we choose at the end of our previous episode. One is a good movie, one is a bad movie in theory, and we do it based around the topic. And the topic for this week was chosen by our patrons, patreon.com/DEDBpod. Stay tuned to the end of the show where we'll talk a bit more about that. But they all chose between 2 80s years. And it was between 1984, which is a more traditional sort of 80s year for people to kind of go back to, and then 1987, which was an interesting choice. But Adam, are you a fan of this tubular time of the 1980s, and particularly 87?
I mean, yeah, for sure, dude. You got to figure I was, 5 years old in 87, and, that's when you really start remembering things you see and movies you see and sort of start leaving an impression on you. So this was like kind of my year. 87 through 89 is like when I really sort of form, tastes and opinions on film, which not necessarily all have carried over, but still you start to recognize actors, you start to remember things, you can quote things, you can everything like that. So yeah, this was a huge, huge year for me.
I mean, it was a huge one for me too. I was like -5 years old. A lot of things happen when you're -5.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
But no, even then, like, despite being born in the 90s, a lot of my favorite films are from the 80s in general. And I'm not saying that just in the obnoxious, like, the 80s were the best kind of way, man, and nor am I saying that about the 90s, any specific decade. But at the same time, a lot of fun movies came out, especially even in 87, I feel like is an underrated year in terms of sort of the 80s. Because I think the big ones, like we mentioned, 84 tends to be a big one, and then also 1982, even 89, just for like the big blockbuster implications that happened with that. If you haven't listened to the show before, in terms of years, usually every year we do like 2 episodes about the year we're currently in, where in the middle we'll talk about a couple movies that have come out this year, and at the end we'll do the same for a couple movies that came out. Mm-hmm. But we've only ever done this where we go back to a past year once before with 1999. Which, tremendous year, obviously, a lot of great things. But we haven't done that in a while, and I hope to do more of these, because I like going back to specific years and kind of just getting a look at the year based on 2 random movies, like we did here.
No, I definitely agree. And I mean, we've covered a couple movies from this year already on the show. But there are some of my favorite all-time films come from this year.
Yes, specifically, I should list movies we've talked about from this year include Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, Prince of Darkness, The Running Man, Monster Squad, From a Whisper to a Scream, Masters of the Universe, and one of our favorite bad movies we've ever talked about on the show, Miami Connection.
Yes. So again, just with that, what you named alone that we've covered, and that's not even counting some of the masterpieces that were released, it's a hell of a year, dude.
Yeah, just to give you an interesting perspective, I have some stats here in our notes, Adam. Some stats about the big movies of the year. First off,
wait a minute. You write notes for this show?
I know, Adam. You know how in your inbox that thing you put to spam? That's my notes.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm not going to change that.
I mean, you put that, it's right there next to all those, like, great things where it says, like, Adam, I think I really appreciate you as a podcast host and collaborator, all those other, like, really sweet emails I sent you. They're all in the spam folder for Adam.
Yeah, no, right. I print them all out and use them as toilet paper.
Well, at least you care that much. I appreciate that so much.
Yeah.
But here, just for example, big Oscar wins this year were Best Picture and Best Director went to The Last Emperor. Best Actor went to Michael Douglas for Wall Street. Best Actress and Best Supporting Actress went to Moonstruck for Best Actress and Olympia Dukakis for Supporting Actress. And Best Supporting Actor went to a subject previously of our show, the late great Sean Connery for The Untouchables. So that's already a weird grouping of movies right there.
Yeah, it's the Chicago way. I'm from Chicago.
Oscar, give it to him.
Give it the Oscar.
Throw it at his fucking face. Do it. And then here are the top 5 grossing movies of the year. You got number 5, Moonstruck, $80 million. You got Good Morning Vietnam, $123 million. Beverly Hills Cop 2, $153 million. Fatal Attraction, $156 million. And $167 million. 3 Men and a Baby.
That's fucking crazy. And I remember 3 Men and a Baby, even from when I was a kid, because my father tried to convince me that there was that ghost child in the movie.
Right, yes.
Where it's, it's just a Ted Danson stand-up, but it scared the shit out of me. Because VHS quality, you cannot tell that it's Ted Danson. And it was terrifying.
Yeah, it's a kind of Ted Danson. The terrifying vision of director Leonard Nimoy.
Mm-hmm.
I've never seen 3 Men and a Baby, but I just love that stat that made that much fucking money in 1987. It was the big movie.
Huge hit. And there's quite a big drop-off between number 4 and 5.
That's true, but even then, Moonstruck being one of the big movies of the year, even making $80 million, that's unheard of now. That a cute romantic comedy made that much money.
It's so good.
Such a great fucking movie. It was my alternate choice for the show. We almost did that.
That year brought me probably my 2 favorite Nicolas Cage performances, Moonstruck and Raising Arizona.
Oh, of course, yes. There'll be plenty of time to talk about other movies that released this year, but we're talking about 2 specific ones, Adam, that we chose at the end of our last episode. We have my good pick, which is a movie called Withnail and I, and then we have your bad pick, which is a movie called Real Men. So of all the big movies we could have covered in either of these categories, we went with 2 that most people probably haven't heard of. That's the double-edged double bill way.
I mean, to the point to where I had never heard of The Good Choice, and you had never heard of The Bad Choice.
No, and even then, I hadn't seen The Good Choice, because I just heard about it, but never seen it. So why don't we go ahead and jump into that Good Choice right away with Withnail and I.
You are cordially invited to spend a carefree weekend in the English countryside. Bask in the warm sunshine.
We've gone on holiday by mistake.
Enjoy the rustic pleasure of country living.
It's gonna be so cold in here. Like Greenland in here. Wants to get down there and have sex with those cows.
Partake of fine varietal wine.
Oh, drunk. I assure you I'm not, officer. I've only had a few ales.
Take lunch at a charming pub.
We want the finest wines available to humanity. We want them here, and we want them now.
Fish in the region's streams.
Don't threaten me with a dead fish.
Withnail and I, a trip worth taking.
What absolute twaddle.
So, Withnail and I came out March 27th, 1987, from director-writer Bruce Robinson, and is a British film where the basic premise is we follow 2 people, the titular characters of Withnail, who's played by Richard E. Grant, and I, who was never really named in the movie. In the script, he's called Marwood. They sometimes reference him as that, but played by Paul McGann, who live in actually the late 60s, 1969. They are 2 out-of-work actors in Britain who are drinking themselves away, particularly Withnail is going really hardcore on the drinking. And they decide, fuck it, we gotta get out of here. Let's go out to the country to Withnail's uncle's house, played by Richard Griffiths' Uncle Monty. And yeah, it's a little dark comedy from Britain. And I'd heard about this a lot, mainly because, one, I love Richard E. Grant, and this was the movie that really made him pop. It's his film debut, and I'd heard tremendous things about his performance. But also, it's gotten a lot of praise as like a Criterion release, and and it kind of had the vibes I'd heard a lot about of like a Hunter S. Thompson kind of journey, a sort of stream of consciousness, in this case, alcohol-addled affair. And I was curious to see it, and I finally have for the show. And I will say, I like Withnail and I, but the sort of praise around it, especially being like, oh, one of the great British films of all time, I'm not sure if I quite agree with that At the same time, I think there's a lot of things that I think are interesting about it. But at the same time, there's also a lot of things that firmly put it in 1987 in ways that kind of disappointed me. I think there'll be a big thing with both the movies we talk about, is that they were very of their time and era. But, Adam, I'm curious to hear from you, because you hadn't even heard of this movie at all, so what'd you think of it?
Well, I'm going to preface it by saying it took me 3 separate viewings to get through it. Not necessarily because I was bored, which, yes, I was, but I also, extenuating circumstances and, life, as they say, was rolling. I don't know. I don't know if I like this or not. And that's 100% honest. I do think Richard Grant is super enigmatic and fun to watch in this. He looks like a goddamn skeleton wearing a flesh suit, but he's really fun in it. My favorite part of it is basically, you can't tell me, all right, with Ralph Brown's character as the drug dealer.
Yes.
Right? You cannot tell me Mike Myers did not see this movie and be like, oh no, I want this character, this exact character, to be in Wayne's World 2. And he's going to look the same, talk the same, act the same, everything. I'm watching, I'm like, oh, that's Del Preston, 100%.
Yep.
So that right away, I'm like, oh, this is awesome, because I love that character. And it's just, I find the whole movie to be sort of drab and a little bit boring. And I say that kind of thinking that might have been what they were going for as well.
No, yeah, I 100% think that's the case. Even the aesthetic of it, it's very grimy, because the whole thing is there are these out-of-work actors, and I love the look of this movie because it really emphasizes on the grime. You really feel like you're in the middle of, like, this environment living with these out-of-work actors who don't have much to do, so they just fuck up their entire apartment. Like, even early on, there's a scene where, like, they try and get something out of the sink, and it's covered in dishes and dirty and terrible, and they're like, oh god, something's living in it. We have to, like, stab something or something like that. There's a lot of, like, I think, fun, admittedly very British humor that comes from, like, Richard E. Grant and Paul McGann kind of bouncing off of each other. And I think, honestly, the movie's really strong for at least the first 2/3 of it because of their chemistry. I think Richard E. Grant could have obviously just been by himself the whole time, but you kind of need someone to be the leash. I think McGann is serviceable as that kind of lead. But at the same time, I do have the problem where whenever we have McGann in his scenes on his own, or particularly one scene where he shares with the Uncle Monty character, I found him to be a lot less interesting. And most of his character traits that they kind of gave him are the more outdated elements of the film.
Yeah, and I really was not a fan of the voiceover monologue.
Right, which you had said you tried watching, like, the first bit of this and you complained about the voiceover thing. I don't think it's as constant an issue necessarily as you feared it would be, because it's just kind of like connective tissue at certain points.
Well, but here's, and I think that's my problem with it. It is in no way a constant thing. It just happens in random parts.
Okay.
Like, it's not if it was a thorough line to where, and I, or whatever you want to call him, was sort of narrating his whole journey through this and sort of his ultimate story, then I don't think I would really have that much problem with it. It's just, it comes off so sporadic. And, sometimes there'll be a single word almost, or just a random sentence that he says, and then that's it. And it's just, to me, it's completely unnecessary.
I would have, I think, more issue with it if it was more constant, because the few times we do get it, it feels like it is just sort of a transitional thing. And I'm fine with that based on the narration isn't that interesting to me. I don't get much interiority out of him, and if it was throughout the whole movie, I would have more problem with it, I think, just because we're getting interiority out of a character who isn't really saying much of anything interesting. It's just kind of weaving together some of these set pieces, or these certain scenes between characters, which I'm a bit more fine with. Like, if they tried to make him sort of, like, the narrator in the way that, like, Hunter S. Thompson is in Fear and Loathing, but the difference being he doesn't have Hunter S. Thompson style, like, weird, crazy ramblings. He's just kind of this asshole who I don't care about. I would have way more of a problem with this movie if it was that constant, honestly.
I mean, yeah, that might be true. I guess I can't disagree with you on that. It's just the fact of the matter is I kind of found him just not only an unlikable character, but I think you already said it best, where if it was just Richard E. Grant, it'd be maybe better. He's just ultimately an unlikable and forgettable and boring character to sort of follow.
I don't know if we would have Richard E. Grant as own. I think that might get a bit toiling as well. I think The weird thing is we haven't talked much about the Uncle Monty character, which is he's played by Richard Griffiths, who people would know
Harry Potter
has Harry Potter, Uncle Vernon. There's no post on Sundays, that guy. I think it's a very good performance of a character who I'm not sure what they want to go with for him. Where I think there are certain moments where I think that character is so engaging and interesting. Like there's a whole, because like whenever they first introduce him at his parlor, and they comment that he's a raving homosexual, which, I mean, initially I'm just like, okay, this is just kind of homophobia at the time that I don't agree with, and it's a bummer that it's here, but at least it's kind of fleeting. And more importantly, Richard Griffiths is delivering a very fun performance of this guy who feels like a sort of dandy character of a different time that's in the late 60s and kind of like is lost to time in a way I think is fun, particularly whenever his cat shows up. It's like, that damn cat, I can't stand him. Look at him gallivanting around. I think he's really fun in scenes like that, or there's a great dinner sequence where they're kind of talking about where it's like, oh, we're 3 people on an island and the world is just full of awful people around us, but we're here and we're so lovely together. You get a bit of that sadness and that sort of like lost to time element for all 3 of these characters. Then as the movie goes along, I think they we'll talk about it, but how did you feel in general, especially when you were introduced to that character?
I think he almost steals the movie as far as performance. He's so good, and he's just, you kind of get the erudite sort of pretentious vibe off him right away. I really enjoyed the character. I really enjoyed him in the performance. I thought he was really good. No, I really liked him. I thought he was fine. I thought he was sort of one of the more interesting characters in the movie. Ultimately, what happens is much, but no, I really did enjoy him quite a bit.
Yeah, I love the scene also where he gets back into the cabin and they think it's that one guy who might be killing them, and they're both in the bed together, just like, oh, he's coming to kill us. Oh, he's breaking the window. Oh no, what's going to happen? And then Mr. Griffiths just pops in like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know where you both were. I just had to get in. I lost my key. And stuff like that. It's a lot of fun when, especially, I think the best sequences of the movie are when like the 3 of them are together in the cabin. And even then, like, I think when they initially go to the cabin, just Withnail and I think there's a lot of fun stuff with, like, they don't know how to get firewood, and they're just, like, freezing up, and they're just like, oh, what are we gonna do? Oh, let's kill this. Like, they get a chicken from that one farmer guy, and they kill him, and just like, oh, let's place him on the stone that's in the middle of the oven, or put our shoes in the oven, like that. There's a lot of fun there. There's a lot of, like, very, like I said, dark British charm to it.
Yeah, they try to cook the chicken in the teapot. And the kid, well, better take his legs off. And they, they pull it out. It's still got feathers all over it, basically, and shit too. Like, these guys just don't know what they're doing. I agree. There is a lot of fun to this movie. It's just, it's told in and it is a thing with British humor and British movies in general, where it's told in such a dry way. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I'll be 100% honest, I've never been a fan of sort of British comedy. I like some of them, but it's never been my real sort of cup of tea, like I know it is for a lot of people.
British humor isn't your cup of tea.
Yeah, hey-o. But this was a very hard watch for me.
Yeah, I don't think we ever talked about this, but like I grew up as like a big fan of not this specific era of British comedy, but like Monty Python was a huge thing for me when I was in high school. I like that kind of a dry British wit, and I think it especially comes off in some of the more absurd sequences that happen here. Like there's a bit when they get some money from Uncle Monty, he's like, "Go buy yourself some shoes," because they've been using paper bags, which is also great when they're trying to walk around outside and shit like that because they don't have boots. And he's just like, "Oh, fuck it, we're not gonna go get that. We're gonna go like get a drink," and they go over to this like really nice little like brunch den of sorts, and they're just like, excuse me everyone, we want the finest wines possible and we want them delivered here, even though like everyone's trying to get them the fuck out of the place. I thought that scene, it's almost one of the better scenes where like McGann is playing off of Grant in a pretty fun way. They both are together. There's so much fun stuff there.
I do think they have pretty good chemistry, Paul McGann and Richard Grant. Like I said, Richard Grant he's fantastic in this movie. And I've always, Paul McGann is definitely one of those character actors where you've seen him in 100 things.
Yeah.
But you're like, who? What's his name? Like, I never know his name.
Even amongst, like, there's a sad thing amongst, like, sort of cult audiences where he's a Doctor Who, but from a TV movie that failed to, like, sort of launch in, like, a state-to-state thing with the U.S., and that's the only big thing he's done as Doctor Who. He's technically one of the 13, but not one anyone cares about. Yeah.
But even that though, even to get into the British thing, Doctor Who's never been my thing.
Yeah.
Like I remember even in high school, I have a couple friends. One of them was a good listener of the show, Elwood Tiberius, really into Doctor Who, and it was a kind of a resurgence of sort of British cinema and television and music even in my days in high school. Like the Beatles were all of a sudden huge again, and Doctor Who and Monty Python and all, and it kind of escaped me. And then it escaped me. I just didn't give it enough attention. I was too busy, like, into skateboarding and things like that. So I didn't even pay attention to any of it. And to be honest, I kind of regret it because I do think there is a wealth of material there, and there's some great stuff, especially with Doctor Who. I know, like, my wife loves Doctor Who, and I know a lot of other people are like, "Oh, dude, you're missing out by not watching Doctor Who."
The Christopher Eccleston Aughton era, I've also watched him a big.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's just I've never given it the chance ever, and I think it's more of a self-imposed maybe fear to where I don't know that I'll get it, and I'll feel stupid for not getting it. So I've never given myself a chance to get into it, and and I think that jades everything like this movie and things like that for me, to where it's like I can't even allow myself to get into it.
Yeah, it's interesting also. This is so British, literally. It's produced by a Beatle. George Harrison, for a time, made a bunch of movies with a company called Handmade Films, which started because of Life of Brian, the Monty Python movie. He kind of bailed them out the last second after they lost financing. So he was producing movies at this time for a bit, throughout the 80s and into the 90s a bit. And yeah, I mean, I get that, especially because, like, obviously when I watch Monty Python and other stuff like that, British humor from, like, the 70s, it's like I don't get all the cultural references necessarily that are going on there. But I think I like the absurdity that happens, and also even in moments like here where it's clear that, like, okay, there's some cultural things I don't quite understand about, like, the specifics of, like, British politics or whatever, especially at the late 60s time. At the same time, I do get the sort of human element of, like, these people feel very lost in the middle of a country that's changing around them. That's a relatable thing no matter what country you come from, and I find that pretty fascinating. Sure. To where, like, even though these people do awful things, especially Withnail and I, do some pretty bad things, at the very same time, I at least get the idea, like, these guys are outcasted, but it's not because they're brave fools. It's because, they've isolated themselves completely because the world's changing around them and they can't change with it. So they've resorted to drink. And I think that especially works for the final scenes of the movie. But, so yeah, let's just get into this bit. And I think before we get into it, we want to emphasize a bit of, like, a content warning. We're going to be talking about some unfortunate sexual assault stuff that happens in this movie. So if that is some sort of emotional trigger for you, we totally understand, and we would probably recommend skipping to when we talk about the other movie. Though keep in mind that's also going to have some issues with that too. After a while, with the Uncle Monty character visiting, it's very clear that he has feelings for the I character, the Paul McGann's character. And yes, there's a lot of implications of, like, gay panic humor that was very prevalent around this time, which is like, he's going to, try and have sex with me or whatever. That was kind of present at the beginning and is even more of a thing end of the second act into the third act of this movie, leading up to a sequence in which Paul McGann tries to go up to his room in the cabin, and Uncle Monty follows him, and Uncle Monty tries to rape the Paul McGann character. And the sequence is... I have so many problems with it because there's a lot of unfortunate tragedy that's kind of built into this, with Bruce Robinson apparently based a lot of this on his experiences as a young actor working with Franco Zeffirelli on the set of Romeo and Juliet, and apparently was also given unwanted advances by that particular director. And I've heard some other similar things about that director from other younger actors from that time. And I get that it's sort of him kind of trying to deal with that trauma, and also they don't try and paint Uncle Monty as a full-out villain as much as sort of what they're trying to do. I want to emphasize, this is what the movie's trying to do, is trying to make him kind of a tragic figure who is, like, completely without any sort of, like, love in his life, so he's trying to force it out of the Paul McGann character. That's what they're trying to do. And I think in the process, even regardless of, like, a different time, different era, I think it's just really messy, and I think it's really disappointing way to especially kind of leave the Uncle Monty character at that point.
Yes, I agree with you. Because the fact of the matter is, different time, different era, tragic character, however you want to sort of frame it, and that's all accurate. Different time, different era, tragic character. I mean, but at the same time, it's still sexual assault.
Yeah.
And it's still incredibly invasive and problematic, and it's almost played for laughs in a way in this movie that really turned me off. Yes. Like, I got to be honest, that was the main point where I completely checked out. I'm like, oh, okay. Because I got what they were going for. I completely understand. But it was just handled very poorly.
Yeah, the thing is, I was in the realm of like, oh, this is getting to be a great movie, and then the sequence happens, and it's
a bummer.
It's a real bummer. It's not just a thing, because like whenever you point stuff like this out, there's always going to be the contingent of people who are like, oh my god, these woke new people, which fuck you. Like you or I being bummed out about a sexual assault scene in a movie that feels poorly handled. Like, it's not necessarily a thing of, like, oh, completely different time, different place, what are you talking about? How could you be upset by that? Like, it's
sexual assault in a film.
That especially doesn't really fit with, like, the rest of the tone of the movie at all. It comes out of nowhere.
Right. It's not like a rape revenge movie where the sexual assault is supposed to be terrifying and, disgusting. It's played for a laugh or sort of another shenanigan that happens while they're in the country. And the fact of the matter is, I find it almost depressing that people like us and you or anybody even has to feel the need to defend their opinion on why they think it's wrong or problematic. Different time, whatever you want to say it, it's still sexual assault played for a laugh. It's not funny. It's never funny. It's never okay.
Right, and it really paints your whole thing about the Uncle Monty character or Paul McGann's character, because also the entire time he's doing gay panic stuff. About it. He's just like, oh my god, he's gonna bugger me, like he says all the time. And then later on he talks to Richard E. Grant just like, because Uncle Monty also says, oh, I thought you were with Withnail. He told me that like you were having some sort of issue or whatever, that you had a secret affection for Withnail.
I thought they were a couple.
Right, I thought they were a couple, and Withnail apparently intimated like, oh, you're closeted and all this other stuff. And then he has a scene with the Richard E. Grant Withnail character where he talks about, oh, you told him I was a toilet trader, I believe is the term, which was a slang for just like, oh, they like blow each other in bathroom stalls, stuff like that. And it's such a bummer that like, especially because like if the whole movie was dealing with something like this on a more overall thematic level, I would feel maybe I would probably like it less, but I would at least be like, well, that feels at least in keeping with the tone of the movie, what it was going for.
Yes.
As opposed to here, it just comes off so randomly.
Well, I'm saying, how many of the movies have we seen from the 60s, 70s, and 80s where there's problematic language, problematic themes throughout the whole movie, but it's the whole movie? I mean, one of my favorite movies, Robocop. There are things in Robocop that you're like, oh my God, I cannot believe this is on screen. But it's part of the movie. It's the story that's being told.
There's a satirical angle to it that, like, at least, like, you can see what it's going for.
Yeah, the whole movie emanates that idea and this dirty, grimy feel to it, and all these things where a movie like this, like Withnail and I, and, even in a way our next feature, where it just comes out of nowhere and you're like, why do this? I've always been against shock value, either humor, horror, whatever you want to call it, just shock value, where it's something that doesn't belong to the story in a whole, but they just do it to make you have a reaction. And it's cheap, and it's always expletive. And this is a perfect example of that for me. To where I agree with you, I was starting to get on board with this movie, and then that happened, and I'm like, oh, I don't respect the vision of this movie now. And that's honestly how I feel about it.
Yeah, because even with some of that backstory stuff about Robinson and dealing with that from Franco Zeffirelli, it still just feels at the same time like, oh, you're dealing with that by just turning sexual assault into this kind of like confrontational, like you mentioned, kind of the shock humor thing, while also trying to make it part of like Uncle Monty's character about how like, oh, he's so sad and desperate that he's going to try and do this to somebody.
Trying to assault somebody.
Right, trying to assault somebody. It still doesn't like endear me that much, especially when I think the movie does a way better job after that point of making the Withnail character come off so much more of like a tragic character that I feel a bit of pity for, even though he's been like an asshole this whole time. At the very least, like, once you get to the ending bit of this movie, where Paul McGann leaves, and they have their farewell sequence, and then he does the Hamlet soliloquy quite well to just a bunch of fucking wolves at a zoo, there's a real tragedy to that I can feel invested in. That's an authentic way of portraying a tragedy, where this guy is like an out-of-work actor, and you think, oh, he's just like this drunk who acts weird toward people and is a spindly sort of like asshole that drives everybody away, including the Paul McGann character. But at the same time, oh, he has a lot of talent as an actor, but he can't display it because of his own insecurities that drive him to drink. That's a phenomenal way of displaying all of that without doing a shitty sexual assault thing for a character.
I completely agree. 100%. You said very much more eloquently than I could have exactly what I'm thinking. Yes, 100% I agree with you. Obviously, both of us historically on this show and historically in our private conversations have huge problems with racism and sexual assault and all that stuff.
Yes.
When things like that are used to purposely sort of provoke, especially in movies like this, where it has really, especially with the uncle character, no reason to be there to begin with.
Or even like with whatever thing they're trying to go for that tries to like give you a shade of the character, it's still like, oh, this is a poor way of doing that. Regardless of the problematic content of it, it's still just a very weird story choice that doesn't fit.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. It could have been done in so many different ways, and yet that's what they decided on. And to me, it not only feels, how do I put this? It's offensive, but it's offensive to me as somebody who doesn't appreciate that humor and who is offended by things like that. But it also feels like it's a novice way to sort of get a chuckle out of somebody, and I think it's lazy.
I think overall the problem is the laziness, which is a bummer, because it's like I said, I think there's a lot of interesting things about this movie. I think, like we mentioned, I'll spin this off into final thoughts by saying I think that I think Richard E. Grant and Paul McGann have a lot of nice chemistry back and forth. There's a lot of great dark British humor that's littered throughout this, and I even think, like, we didn't talk much about like the actual set design look. I can see why people like David Fincher in particular loves this movie, because it has the aesthetic of like a
sense. Yeah,
because he was a big fan and actually cast Ralph Brown and Paul McGann in Alien 3 because of that, and wanted to have Richard E. Grant play the Charles Dance character in Alien 3. But they couldn't work that
sense.
Yeah, which I think that you can feel that because like it has that grimy aesthetic, and this is way before Fincher directed movies at any point, so you can kind of see that influence. So it's a movie where like I see the touchstone in terms of like where people progressed from it, and why it was progressive to some degrees at the time, but also why it's totally backwards and of specific like 1987 in that own way as well. So I like aspects of the movie, and I think overall I would say I didn't regret entirely my experience watching it, but that one element I think does sour it enough to where it's not at this pinnacle I'd heard about for so long. I'm not mad I watched it, but I am disappointed with how a potentially great movie I heard so much about kind of has this unfortunate element of it that is not just dated for the time, but also is just a really big, huge story development that feels lazy.
Yeah, look, I'm never mad that I've watched something I haven't seen. I love experiencing new movies. Love them or hate them, it's always exciting for me to watch something I've never seen, something I've never heard of. Like, and this one fits that bill. And part of a genre that I'm not necessarily well versed in. So it's something new for me. It's a new experience in every way. But I will say, I just was not into this movie from the beginning. I tried, and it started getting good, and then obviously the thing we've referenced several times happened, and it fell off for me. This is not one that I'm not going to remember this movie. B, it's not one that I honestly don't get really any of the admiration for it, and I think it sort of fits perfect in its lost to time role it's taken on. I think it's fine where it is. It should stay there.
Yes, and we'll talk about another movie very much lost to time in just a moment. But first, here's a promo for an ESO so you can queue up right after ours.
The 42 cast is turning 100, but like all good things, it must come to an end. Tune in to our epic finale as we see who lives, who dies, and who gets their own spin-off. And then come back when the 42 cast is back for season 2, with even more segments, more guests, and more of explaining why Ryan is wrong. It's why we're still the ultimate answer to fandom, geekiness, and everything. You can only find all this awesome by downloading the 42 cast, a proud member of the ESO network.
And let's go ahead and jump into our second film, Real Men.
Nick Pirandello, CIA agent.
I think I went into the CIA because most other employers have rules against bringing automatic weapons to work.
Bob Wilson, insurance agent.
I'm thinking about joining a health club, but for now I'm just eating more bran.
A couple of real men.
Most guys don't stay in the business very long. You know, they get shot, poisoned, they lose interest.
I think Russians are people just like us. Little paler, maybe.
James Belushi is Nick. John Ritter is Bob. Becoming partners for a dangerous secret mission wasn't their idea. Only the CIA could think of something that stupid. Real Men. Coming real soon to a theater real close.
So, Real Men came out on September 25th, 1987, a bit later in the year, from director-writer Dennis Feldman, who did some comedy stuff around this time, like he'd written The Golden Child prior to this. And weirdly, after this movie, shocker, wasn't a success, he moved on to writing weird sci-fi things, like he wrote Species, weirdly. and then Virus as well in the 90s. So very... Yeah, very, very weird career for him. If you are probably confused, like, what is this movie? You might have heard of Withnail and I, but you've probably never heard of Real Men. To any degree, this was a choice Adam picked, and did get released to theaters, though was not very successful at making $873,000 roughly at the box office. But I understand did play a lot on HBO, and I believe that's where you probably saw it, Adam.
Oh, countless times.
Yeah, why don't you tell people about what the basic premise of Real Men is, and what you think about it?
Oh, fuck. That's an impossible task, but I will accept it. Real Men is basically about... it stars the not funny Belushi and John Ritter. It turns out that the American government has had dealings with UFO men for a long time. John Ritter plays Joe Schmo everyman, sort of, suburban dad. And he just so happens to look like this lead CIA agent who was dealing with the spacemen. So he gets recruited by their top agent, who is the Belushi, to sort of carry on the deal. But it turns out that half the agency is against them because they can either get the big gun or the good package from this UFO people. And it's sort of them on a road trip adventure to get to this certain spot at a certain time to meet these aliens to sort of either save the world or destroy it.
Yeah. That's roughly right. That's not the worst job I could have seen, I would have said, of summarizing the movie. Why did you choose that, and why did you think you want to discuss this one?
Well, I absolutely loved this movie when I was a child. I thought it was so funny. And I thought it was just one of the coolest things. I thought Belushi as Nick was so funny. And I thought John Ritter was so funny, which John Ritter is funny. I just remember it being crazy and chaotic and not making a lot of sense. And watching it again for this show, which is the first time I've seen it since I was probably a kid, that sort of still holds true. This movie is chaotic and makes no sense. That's still pretty accurate. Mm-hmm. And that's why I picked it, because I know nobody had seen this movie. And as soon as I was researching for the show for movies in 1987, I was like, oh, I remember this movie. It has a horrible score. Well, I'm going to pick it then.
Yeah, that's
And
true of like both its overall rating and also the movie's like musical score.
Well, nah, fuck you. That lead song slaps, son.
As I mentioned at the end of the last episode, I had no idea what the hell this was. Never heard of this movie. Was not aware of what the hell was. Not even of the other implications of which I definitely stayed away from any kind of plot thing because you told me like, oh, this movie takes really weird turns. So I'm like, okay, I want it to wash over me. And I will agree that it's very crazy, it's very chaotic, and I can enjoy a crazy and chaotic movie. The only trouble is, especially when it's a comedy, it has to have something else. What does that have to have? Laughs, that's it. And I got barely any out of this movie. I think this is a fucking massive failure of a comedy. I really was just sitting there, occasionally puzzled in an interesting way. It's like, oh, okay, the movie's taking this turn, but also I laughed maybe twice this whole movie. I can pinpoint 2 specific times. There's the bit where in the middle of the shootout that happens with all the other agents in John Ritter's neighborhood, and it's mostly just handguns until one guy brings out a bazooka, which I thought was like a pretty, that's like, oh, it's absurd, it's kind of like fun bit. And then also there's a bit where they have, it's a later shootout that happens, and then everything pauses, and John Ritter's like, what's happening? And Jim Belushi says, oh, they break for lunch. They're not as dedicated as we are.
Yeah.
that
so we
was,
can just walk away? Yeah, let's go.
That was another genuinely funny, like, okay, that worked pretty well. The rest of this movie, I was either aghast or just very unentertained on every level, so it tried to make me laugh. And I think it does have a lot to do with the casting, where I agree that I think John Ritter can be quite funny. I've seen him be very funny, and like obviously some of the old sitcoms and some of the few movie roles he did and stuff like that I've seen, I thought he's a very funny actor. I just think it's weird casting where in theory, like, oh, hey, make him sort of like the nebbish everyman character. And I think John Ritter works in that way, but when he has more of like a determined goal, and he's also kind of nebbishy and awkward. Like on Three's Company, that's what worked every time, is that he'd be in the middle of a situation, but he's like, oh, I gotta like hide the ladies away from Mr. Freely or whoever the fuck. And so I gotta like, I have this particular goal, but I'm so awkward and flummoxed during all of it. The first half of this movie, he's just flummoxed but doesn't have any kind of real goal. He's just kind of like stammering around, kind of lost. And the second half of the movie, he gains confidence and he has a goal, but also he's not nebbish, so we're not using the typical John Ritter nebbishness at all. And I just think he kind of feels lost in the middle of it. And then with Jim Belushi, casting him as a top agent, I guess, is sort of like part of the charm. It's like, oh, he's the silly Belushi, but he's like a confident, competent agent. He just comes off as just such a fucking unlikable douche to me.
And I don't disagree with you, and I think that's sort of the point of the Belushi character. I agree with you on the Ritter character 100%. But I think that's the point of the Belushi character. He's just a fucking douche. Like, he's playing John Ritter the whole movie. He's some sex-starved maniac. And this is not me defending the movie at all. Don't take it as that. But I think Belushi actually works kind of well in this movie as Nick, where he's, supposedly one step ahead of everybody. He's the best agent in the world. But everything that happens to him happens by coincidence. It's just by coincidence that he's, one step ahead of everybody. He's a bumbling moron.
But he's also hyper competent. The movie never really picks a lane.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, that's true.
That's the problem, is that he's consistently like hyper confident, but he also wants to have the Belushi kind of like simple charm, which we haven't talked much about Jim Belushi. It's interesting because this is obviously a few years after his brother passed away, and so everyone was kind of trying to have him take the mantle up of like, you can be the new Belushi star, you can do it, especially around this time. This is around like K9 and the Taking Care of Business and shit like that, where they're trying so hard to be like, you're a comedy star, and it never really worked for him.
You look similar to your brother. You kind of sound like him.
Right, and they tried to give him vehicles that would have, I'm sure John would have rejected roundly, but Belushi, Jim was just like, sure, I'll take it. I'm totally on board. And I think that created a lot of animosity against him, and even I had that animosity as well against him for a while. I think as of recent, he's found like the best niche, which is just to be kind of like an idiotic, schlumpish person who means well, and I think that's what has worked as like his portrayal. Particularly, his best turn ever has been in the recent revival of Twin Peaks. That third season, he's so fucking funny.
So
He's so fucking great in that bit. And even, like, on Twitter and stuff, where now he's just like, hey, I grew a weed farm, and also, you guys watch anime? I like anime.
Yeah, he's just a schmuck. He's a weird goofball. Like, yeah, I completely agree with you. But I gotta be honest, rewatching this, I didn't laugh out loud a lot on the rewatch. I probably smiled a lot more than actually laughing, just because I remembered a lot of it. But I do still think it's pretty fucking funny that the CIA's top agents try to hide out in public by dressing as clowns so no one will recognize them. I thought that was funny. I still think it's funny. It's stupid, but for some reason, I still think it's funny.
I really just felt nothing for any of that.
You're just dead inside. Who hurt you, Thomas?
Oh, you did by making me watch this movie. No, I did not find that sequence particularly, like, interesting or funny at all. I just think it's like, okay, I get the bit that they're dressed up as clowns, and that's supposed to be humorous, I guess, and they're just standing out, and, like, that's the joke. It's this whole thing of, like, oh, I get it's a stupid comedy. I just think it delivers more on the first half of that than the second half of it.
That does come late in the movie, so the movie is already worn on you at that point. I understand.
Oh, and
I completely understand.
Well, and I think with, like, my biggest trouble is how much the movie, like, you're talking about, like, oh, Belushi's kind of incompetent and like silly with, like, whatever he's doing, but he's also so competent an agent that, like, the movie wants to mold John Ritter into that mindset. The whole movie's called Real Men because it's like, oh, let's have Belushi turn this, like, average schmo who lives in the suburbs into a real man, and a real man means he's, like, confident, but in a way where he's just being an asshole to other people. So it's like, oh, let's turn John Ritter into an asshole. That's, like, what ultimately gives him the self-confidence. Not anything that's, like, kind of fun and gets you invested in their back and forth, but it's like, oh, let's turn him into a quote-unquote real man, which also really makes this one sequence that also has unfortunate implications to it, but we have to talk about how weird the sequence is. Yeah, and just like the last movie, just quickly, this is going to be a bit of a content warning as well, because we're going to be covering a bit from this movie that has transphobia, also sexual assault is implied in this one as well. So just a fair warning to anybody who that might be triggering for.
So, the scene you mentioned earlier where the Russians break for lunch and they leave, which, by the way, also, I got to be honest, I did laugh again at that scene because it's preposterous and it's funny. So they end up just walking, and, John was like, where are we going? Oh, we're going here. It's my parents' house. And her mom's there, and, the mom tells her, oh, also your aunt, whoever's here. So Belushi leaves the room with his mom to go make sandwiches, and Ritter standing there.
Hold on, they emphasize that your aunt and also your dad's back from the hospital. Both those things.
Yes. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So John Ritter standing in the foyer. This older woman comes down the stairs, and she instantly throws herself at John Ritter, and to the point to where they're on the couch and she's kissing him. Well, then out come Belushi and his mom, and he's like, "Dad!" And it turns out it's his dad who had a sex change. And Ritter is mortified by it.
And Jim Belushi goes on a huge thing about, like, isn't it so great that they were able to do this for themselves, and that I'm so proud of my father for being able to do that. So, there's so many different layers here, where Jim Belushi is technically being extremely ahead of his time, and being very supportive of his father having this sex change. Yes, incredibly, for that particular time.
To the point to where he even says when he decided he wanted to do this, a lot of people were upset and confused. Mom, do you remember how you felt? Like, he's even calling his own mother out for it.
And we're sorry about, like, pronoun things here, because, like, they call him father, he, a lot, despite this.
Yeah, that's of course. Right. In the context of the film. Yeah, yes. Let's just remember what Dad wanted to do, and you were against it, but he's happy now. Like, this is Dad. And, he's like, look at you. You look great. Granted, he grabs his breast. He's like, look at the tits on him, which is, in the context of the character, I get it. He's still like, wow, way to go, Dad. You know what I mean? Now, the thing is, I understand where you're going to go, where John Ritter's, like, mortified.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Now, think of it this way, and I might not change your mind, but think of it this way. Not only was he basically assaulted by somebody, right?
He was initially assaulted, then he got into it. Another great implication of the scene, yes.
But in that context, if you found out this was this guy's father, you'd be like, what? It'd blow your mind too. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but I'm saying I almost understand where he's like, what is going on? Like, I get it. What is going on?
I mean, that's a very charitable read of the scene. That
Probably.
I get on some level that's kind of what they're going for, but the main thing is just the transphobic nature, just like, oh my god, can you believe that this guy had a sex change and he was making out with me? I can't believe that. As a straight man, I am so astonished by this.
But none of that is said. That's never said. That's never addressed again after the scene.
No, it's a really cheap laugh that they throw out here. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I agree with you, but the thing is, it could be. I hate to say it this way, but it could be worse. And I've seen it done worse in movies, to where the very next scene would be John Ritter's character throwing up in the toilet or throwing Ace Ventura, for God's sakes.
Oh, Ace Ventura is 1,000 times worse on because the whole climax hinges on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen it done way worse. And honestly, and I know it's problematic, but for a movie of this time, and for something like that, I think it's handled actually a lot better than anyone would expect.
I mean, I think that's part of what my problem is with like the overall context of like what the Belushi character is supposed to be, because they're so inconsistent about like, oh, he's an incompetent schlub, but also, oh, he's this character who you're supposed to be endeared to, and you're supposed to like, Ritter, you should change to be more like, because this is what a real man is. And in theory, this would be like the more interesting thing of like, oh, okay, he's a very progressive person, and John Ritter could be changing to that. But really, it's about also becoming an incredibly toxic piece of shit person. Jim Belushi honestly is by the end of the movie. Overall, like, this is the one sort of interesting progressive moment of his character. He's a supportive, but even then, the whole scene, the way it's framed, they don't say this directly to you, I agree, but the filmmaking is entirely implying that Jim Belushi is supposed to be the crazy one in this scenario, who's so positive about this, and John Ritter is in the right by being disgusted by what's going on here. And that's the comedy of the scene.
No, you know what? I didn't think about it that way, but that is very accurate.
Yeah.
That is 100% true. Granted, rewatching it, now the title, Real Men, I understand the flaws and the problems with it. Now, as an adult man watching it. When I was a kid, I didn't notice anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I never thought of any of that. I honestly thought it was just silly. But yes, I do understand there is a level of sort of how do I put this? Toxic masculinity, to where it's like, this is what all men should be. You should just negate your feelings, negate, whatever, blah, 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 and just be a man's man. Now, that is a problematic thing. I don't think I have as many problems with it maybe as I should, and I'm going to go ahead and say that is based solely on nostalgia.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of what we talked about with the Withnail and I thing, where I get that it's definitely like I'm not expecting this movie to have the exact politics of my time right now. I've seen plenty of movies like a Withnail and I and other things where it's like I see what they're going for, but I think it ultimately doesn't work. And I think in this case, it's kind of like, especially when it becomes the huge thematic thrust of the movie, is really about sort of changing John Ritter's character over to being a Belushi and having like this kind of like super hyper masculine piece of shit kind of like tone to much of what he's saying. It makes a scene like the one we're talking about at his parents' house stick out a lot more. I'll say this much, even though it's such a weird scene that has a lot of problematic elements to it. It's the most interesting scene in the movie, in that I was like wide awake, like, what the fuck is this? Because after that, we go on the road trip again. And it's a lot more of these same gags where John Ritter's in the dark and he's doing his, this shtick I was talking about, where he doesn't have the confidence, that eventually gains the confidence, but loses the nebbishness. And it's not nearly as funny as he usually is. And Belushi still just has like also this weird thing where like he's becomes attracted to an S&M woman he meets in a bar, and like that suddenly makes him feel a bit more sensitive, which I thought like, oh, is this going to be like an interesting turn where like they kind of switch roles? I think that's what they're kind of going for. But then by the end of the movie, he's still just kind of the same dude. It doesn't matter.
In whole, I agree with that. The only thing that I don't know that John Ritter necessarily, he kind of does become the Belushi character, because a lot of the taglines, like, I want to make a big thing out of it or whatever. But it's also very clearly shown that he does not know how to sort of defend his family and sort of stand up for what's right or anything. So he does kind of gain the confidence through shitty means. But again, I'm also trying to dissect real men. I don't think I have that many problems with it on a thematic level as far as sort of the messages that are trying to be conveyed, more or less than I do on a just it's not that funny. Like it's not that funny. There's a lot of jokes that really don't land. Even silly slapsticky jokes don't land.
Yeah, I'll put it this way, that like I don't think I would be analyzing it as much as I am if I wasn't being distracted by at least like some of the jokes. I think that's the thing, is when I'm watching especially a comedy of this time and I'm not being entertained with the laughs, it's like, well, I gotta entertain my mind somehow. Let's look at what this is kind of doing on sort of a thematic level, putting it in its place in time, makes the mind whirl on that instead of, I don't know, laughing at John Ritter saying, that was my seat, get out of here. And also for some reason wearing that fucking black shirt that comes out of nowhere. Like there's just a scene where he's changed outfits and there's no reference to it at all.
No. Yeah, he's wearing a weird cowboy shirt.
Right. I'm sure there was a deleted scene that happened in like the middle of this fucking movie that just like got excised where he changed his fucking outfit to that weird an outfit.
Yeah. I don't know, man. I think there is sort of a lot of, like I said, toxic masculinity in this film, but I do think that also runs rampant in a lot of 80s and 90s films.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I could rattle off, I don't know how many, that the whole movie's like, just be a man. You know, that's what it was, be a macho. I mean, it happened nonstop. Like I said, for it to be a comedy, which, by the way, it is wacky. There's a lot of crazy shit in this movie with the pen and the glass and the water in the tree and, you know, John Ritter with the bang, bang, bang. Like, it's silly, dude. It's fucking silly.
Mm-hmm.
But as an adult, none of it really lands the way I kind of hoped it would from when I was a kid.
Right.
Because when I was a kid, I fucking thought it was hilarious. Now I'm like, oh, that just goes to show what my sense of humor was as a child.
It also goes to show, I think, that why Dennis Feldman only made one movie, because I think it's also just on, like, comedy, you want to, like, a lot of people would assume, oh, it's just kind of like on a factory, anybody can, like, put this out. Comedy is super hard to stage and to make actually, like, really funny on a visual level, especially a movie like this. It's doing, say, like, the shootout scene with, like, the whole, in theory, like, oh, Belushi is shooting off the gun, and John Ritter thinks he's able to, like, use his finger as a gun. Suddenly it's, like, magically working for him. That's what the scene's going for. I could see a version of that scene being very funny. As opposed to in this movie, it is so poorly, like, set up and staged and everything, the joke isn't landing in any way.
I definitely agree with you. I think comedy is the hardest thing to land.
Mm-hmm.
It's easier to shock somebody or startle somebody, you know, in horror films or whatever, or to make somebody feel play with their emotions and be emotionally manipulative and drama, like bad dramas, and make them feel something even though like it's garbage, than it is to make someone genuinely laugh and connect with something that's funny. And this movie does try. It really tries. But it is definitely, as I watch it as an adult, it is definitely immature humor that I get why I thought it was funny as a kid. I really do get it. As an adult, no. Basically, 90% of the jokes don't land for me now.
Yeah. And I'm not against immature humor. Like, we make stupid, immature jokes here all the time. And, like, there can be, like,
speak for yourself, buddy.
No, I'm sorry. You're the more highfalutin one that does, like, a very witty repartee. The entire
I'm like a Richard Belzer to your Dane Cook. All right, buddy.
You know, I was fine here, and then you had to, like, insult me on a personal level. Like
I'm so sorry.
How fucking dare you do that to me?
Yeah, I apologize.
I have respect for myself. See, unlike John Ritter, I can do that. I can be respect myself. It's like, fuck you, buddy. How dare you do that to me? And I'm not gonna be an asshole. Like, I'm gonna be a toxic piece of shit asshole about it either. But
yeah. Are you trying to say I was being a toxic asshole?
No, I'm saying I'm not being like John Ritter becomes at the end of the movie.
Oh, I was gonna say, Jesus Christ, man.
See, and there's the importance of being able to set up a joke correctly. Because if you don't, it comes off pretty stupid. I proved my point.
There you go. Fair enough.
We're fun. We're friends now, guys. We're friends.
Yeah.
Fine. We're friends. You know what, I guess let's get into final thoughts about Real Men then, because we've gone on quite a long time about both these movies.
Way longer than I thought. Yeah, way longer.
Quite longer, yes. So, Adam, go ahead into some final thoughts that aren't just I loved it as a kid nostalgic love, if you can muster anything else.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, not much. Like I said, I still smile a lot. I smiled a lot while watching it, just because it took me back to a place when I first saw it. Taking that aside, watching it, like hypothetically, if I watch it for the first time today, it's not funny. There's a couple slapsticky moments that might work. Like I said, the break for lunch thing is probably the best joke in the movie. It's absurd. The whole story is just nonsensical bullshit. This is a definition of, like we said with the last movie, this movie fits directly in this time, and it should stay there.
Yeah. I think just to really emphasize, like, my sort of issue with some of the more problematic elements of the movie are definitely just a case of, like, me just trying to find anything to, like, really be at all, like, to pontificate at all about on this show. Because if that scene wasn't even in this movie, I would just be saying, like, oh, this is just not funny. And that would be the worst podcast where it's just like, I think this is funny. I don't think it's funny. Like, there's nothing to say about that on much of any level. And I'm also just, that's why I'm going into, like, some of the issues about, like, oh, I think it's directed poorly, it's miscast. I was thinking, by the way, I think more than a Belushi, the kind of person who would fit maybe role like this perfectly and wouldn't make it come off as, like, as sleazy as I think it is, would be like a Michael Keaton.
Yeah, even like a Bill Murray. Perfect Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd movie.
Yeah, honestly, I think that's what they're really going for. And as it stands, I think that Belushi's very miscast. I think that Ritter is, you know, I think trying to do his shtick, but it's just weirdly stretched and separated in a way that I think is the problem with, like, the script, which has a lot of weird thematic elements I'm not sure what's quite going for. And then even when it goes for the silliness, I think the direction just kind of makes a lot of the sillier elements that I could see working with a different person behind the camera or even writing it in practice. It ultimately comes off as just like, oh yeah, I kind of get what this is forgotten because it's not really that funny a movie. I've seen a lot of people do like this movie that has sort of a weird cult around it. And if you like it, still, I mean, you know, I'll power to you for, you know, like what you like. I just have, you know, a lot of issues with some of the stuff that it's trying to portray.
This broke my heart, like, honestly.
Oh, revisiting it?
I remember. Yeah, it really did, because I remember fondly this movie. I loved this movie, and rewatching, I'm like, oh no. So yeah, this is definitely one of the ones that I've done for the show that I remember loving that has not held up. This is definitely probably the top one.
I've had that happen sometimes with the show, and it's always a bummer when that does happen. But also at the same time, we can progress and grow from it, and even you can even be, I would argue, so charitable to certain scenes in this movie that it feels like you've opened a new wing of a charity just to be charitable to it.
Yeah.
But also, yeah, it's definitely, I agree, we're covering two movies that fit very much in their specific time and place. And I think that may be made for an interesting look back at 1987 for all of the bad and a few occasional good things. But mostly bad.
I agree.
That's the end of our very heavy discussions, at least on a very special episode of Double Bill.
I mean, wow. We got some fucking themes with these movies I did not expect, but you know what? It was awesome.
Right. And by the way, if you're also a member of, say, the LGBT community and you heard us talk about this, we're sorry if we got maybe some things a bit off. We're two white straight guys, so please write to us. doubleheadshibblbill@gmail.com. If you have any sort of comments on how we discussed it or how maybe the films portrayed any of these elements, we'd love to hear you.
It's definitely.
But let's go ahead and get into some feedback of our own, because along with at doubleheadshibblbill@gmail.com, you can also send feedback to us over on our Facebook and Twitter page at DEDBpod, where we've asked you, hey, what are your favorite least favorite movies related to whatever topic we're doing? And in this case, with 1987, we had a couple people share some thoughts, including James Rodriguez, who says, what a year for film, 1987. It gave us Evil Dead 2, Robocop, Near Dark, A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, Raising Arizona, Hellraiser, The Witches of Eastwick, and Slumber Party Massacre 2. It also gave us Three Men and a Baby, which really didn't need a drug subplot. And then Christian Alvarez says 1987 had a bunch of great movies, especially some great horror movies. Some bad movies include From a Whisper to a Scream, Ishtar, Jaws the Revenge, Masters of the Universe, and a couple guilty pleasures with the Garbage Pail Kids movie and Superman 4 The Quest for Peace. Some favorites are Evil Dead 2, The Gate, Good Morning Vietnam, Hellraiser, La Bamba, The Lost Boys, The Monster Squad, Near Dark, A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, Predator, The Princess Bride, Raising Arizona, Robocop, Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2, Slumber Party Massacre 2, Spaceballs, and The Untouchables. Also, I just want to say, love the George Lucas episode. Glad to hear you guys talking about American Graffiti, which is one of my favorite movies, and Howard the Duck, which, while it isn't great, is at least very interesting.
Right on. So, normally this would be the point where Tom's would say, oh, do you got any other films to mention for this year? Nope.
They were all pretty much mentioned here, that's true.
You kind of covered it all, which, hey, that's good, though. I'll take it. Hey, Angel Heart.
Yeah, that
Angel
one
Heart
wasn't mentioned.
was
I think that one's really great. I concur with that. It's got a very obvious twist to it. If you're watching the movie, you're like, is this what the twist is? Yes, it is. That's what the twist is.
Yes, it is.
The first thing you think of, that's it.
Yep, it works. I argue that is one of the most telegraphed twists that still works.
Yeah, it's still really, really engrossing, good, sort of like, it has so many, it's like fantasy, but also noir and horror, and it's sort of a genre bending movie. And, I do want to mention there's a few others, some scant few, that I can mention here, that weren't put out on Front Street by everybody here. Broadcast News wasn't mentioned. I love that movie. That's
a good movie.
Oh, I fucking love that movie so much. Probably the best James L. Brooks movie. I just love, it's probably my favorite William Hurt performance. We've talked about William Hurt plenty of times. He's basically a himbo in that movie in a way that's really endearing to me. It's one of, and also obviously Holly Hunter's so great, and Albert Brooks. I love me some like nebbishy Albert Brooks, and it's so good. But also, I want to put a shout. We talked about some horror sequels that were here. Shout out to Prom Night 2, or it's Hello Mary Lou Prom Night 2.
Mary Lou. Yeah, man.
Which, especially because
call
the original Prom Night, I'm not a big fan of. It's one of those post-Halloween slashers that's just really dull to me. It's just like, yeah, I get it. We're kind of doing the regular thing here. And then I'd heard Prom Night 2 was so great. I'm like, okay, let's see how this is. Oh, this movie's wacky and weird. This is fun.
Oh, it's off the rails. Yeah, it's off the rails. It's a great movie. Another good horror movie I want to throw out from 87 is The Hidden. The Hidden's awesome. It's so good. And then I mentioned it actually on our George Lucas episode, but my favorite Hughes movie came out in 87, which is Some Kind of Wonderful. Other than Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, but Some Kind of Wonderful.
I will say, I think there's so much about that movie that's great. Particularly, I love Mary Stuart Masterson in that movie.
Oh, she's so good.
She's so fun. Obviously, Leah Thompson, who was the sort of reference point. Or even Elias Koteas.
I never even realized that was him until I rewatched it.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's why I've always loved Elias Koteas. I thought it was because he played Casey Jones. No, I saw Some Kind
He's
of Wonderful.
kind of also prototype Casey Jones in that movie, which is a lot.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
I will say, though, the thing that just kind of like slightly hurts it for me, it's not just the actor, but also I'm not a big fan of the main character as played by Eric Stoltz. I think is like such a, I know he's such a dick wet blanket for the movie, and it's like, oh, should I be with Mary Stuart Masterson or Leah Thompson? And it's just like, oh, the fucking smallest violin for you, dude. I'm so sad for you.
Right. Yeah, I know, Robert. Oh man.
Yeah, it's a lot of that, but no, it's still, I would say I agree. It's a pretty fun, underrated Hughes movie in particular.
Lethal Weapon as well,
right? Or even Beverly Hills Cop 2, which we've mentioned is like one of the big hits of the year.
Yeah.
I personally prefer that a bit more to Beverly Hills Cop 1. It's got that Tony Scott action that I did.
100%.
And you know what? One that I just wanted, just from my childhood, a weird kids movie in this vein. The Brave Little Toaster.
Metal Jacket. Oh yeah.
When I was a little kid, just like, oh, you lose dog shit that high.
They got bars of soaps in their pillowcases. That's a waste of soap.
I mean, for the record, that's a great movie. But at the same time, Brave Little Toaster as a kid was very traumatizing. But also, I have a lot of.
So good. I really have fond memories of that movie. I haven't seen it since I was a kid, But I remember really liking that movie.
I watched it like late in high school again, and I was just like, oh, this is so cute. It's not the greatest movie, but it feels also interesting because that was originally pitched by, unfortunately, I have to mention him, John Lasseter. He wanted to do that as like an early CG movie for like Disney Animation proper. And they were like, no, we can't do that. It's like, fine, I guess we'll just do it as like some secondary animation studio thing. But one day I'll make a CG thing about sentient objects. And he did.
Yeah, he did. He definitely did that.
Yes. But what about maybe some bad ones, Adam?
Oh, man. First one pops in the head is Steel Dawn with Patrick Swayze. Have you seen this? Have you heard about this?
I've heard about this. I have not seen it.
It's not good.
Yeah.
Cherry 2000. Also not good.
No idea what that is. No idea what that is.
Oh, it's something. Even though I know it's not good, but I like Bad Taste, the Peter Jackson movie.
I like Bad Taste. I recently rewatched that. I think that's interesting just on like, oh wow, this is a scrappy little movie that's able to do so much weird, especially like gory and like special effects stuff. That's pretty phenomenal.
Man, 4, The Quest for Peace, also came out in 1987, and the only other two I even want to mention is A Return to Salem's Lot.
Right, weirdly, a theatrically released sequel to a miniseries.
To a made-for-television miniseries.
Also from like 8 years prior. So weird.
Yeah. And Over the Top with Sylvester Stallone.
Yeah, Over the Top.
Yeah, not a good movie.
Terrible father has to fight for his son by doing arm wrestling.
To win a truck as well.
Yes. I mean, in terms of some of the bad ones, I think I have an example kind of like a Real Men for me, where I really loved it as a kid, and then I went back to it, was like, oh wow, no, this is very uneven, to say the least. Is the sketch movie Amazon Women on the Moon?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, no.
I would say there's a lot of like bad shit in it, but also at the same time, some of the sketches, particularly, I love the Bullshit or Not, which was a parody of like Unsolved Mysteries, which is like stupid shit. Like, was Jack the Ripper the Loch Ness Monster, and they built a giant fucking Loch Ness Monster? It's just like there's some fun, or even like the actual parody of the Amazon Women on the Moon is a great sort of parody of like Forbidden Planet and other like 50 sci-fi movies like that. Some like Joe Dante, John Landis participating in. There's some stuff that's really terrible, but there's also a few bits that are fun.
Another one that I really liked, it was a sequel to a movie I still actually like, but I really loved the sequel when I was a kid, and I've watched it recently. It's awful. Is the Jason Bateman starring Teen Wolf 2.
Ooh.
I thought it was great when I was a kid. It is atrocious.
Yeah, I would figure. I watched even Teen Wolf recently. That's not from '87, but I don't even think that holds up very well either.
Oh, it probably doesn't. I haven't seen it forever. But '87 also gave us Timothy Dalton's Bond in The Living Daylights.
Right, which I would argue is the better of his two movies.
I actually kind of like both his movies. I think Dalton's an underrated Bond.
I think Dalton is the sad tragedy of great Bond trapped in not great Bond movies. I think even Living Daylights I like. I think License to Kill just has the problem like, oh, this is just like a Miami Vice episode featuring James Bond.
Yeah, pretty. Yeah, I guess I can't argue with that. Another one I want to throw out there that I really love is the original The Stepfather.
That's one I haven't seen.
Oh, the original Stepfather. It's one of my favorite, even though they did do 2 sequels, second one starring the same actor and the third one not at all, which I think might have been a made-for-TV sequel. Mm-hmm. The first Stepfather is so good. Terry Quinn is terrifying in it. I cannot stress enough how good the Stepfather is. And unfortunately, it got sort of lost in that era where, I mean, there were so many slasher movies coming out and horror films. And the Stepfather, unfortunately, not only did it get lost, but it also got saddled with that piss poor remake. So nobody even bothered to give it the original attention. I think the original is such a good, more a thriller than a horror movie. It's really, really phenomenal.
Real quick, before we do have to kind of move on to the close of the show, I did want to say, one, just, I think not a good movie, but probably one of the best titles in cinematic history came out in 87 of House 2, The Second Story.
Yes!
Not a good movie, brilliant title. One of the best titles of all time.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
I saw that title in I think the Leonard Maltin review book I had as a kid, and I was like, this is the most amazing title for a movie I've ever seen. You watch the movie, oh, this is just, it's weird, but it's just not good. I wanted to also say one that it was mentioned a couple times, and I remember not liking this movie, and I actually rewatched it shortly before we recorded earlier today. Ishtar isn't that bad. I'm gonna say it.
Man, that was going to be one of my alternate choices for the bad originally, because I've never seen it. I just know it's a huge flop, but I haven't seen it.
I think that's the thing. It got sort of the reputation of being a huge flop, and also Warren Beatty and Dustin Hoffman starred in it. I watched it because I'm going through Elaine May's movies. And I would say that's the one that put her in director jail. She never made another movie after that, which I think is unfair because it lost money, sure, but plenty of other male directors have been able to recover from flops and do other bullshit. Even Warren Beatty has managed to do that before. I also think it's not that terrible a movie. It's not the funniest movie. I think it's definitely too long and has a lot of problems with it. But I kind of have fun, especially with Dustin Hoffman and Warren Beatty singing terrible songs together. There's a lot of really funny, terrible songs in that movie. It's fine. I don't get it as it's not one of the worst movies ever made.
You've seen it. Is it a movie I would like?
I think you'd probably be in a similar camp to me where you wouldn't love it, but you'd be like, oh, that was fine. I don't get why everybody hates it so much. But yeah, well, thank you all for submitting the feedback and listening, and also we want to thank some other people. I want to thank Chris Oliver for the intro and outro music used in our show. Listen to more of his music at chrisoliver.bandcamp.com. Thanks to Emily Scarter for the art for our show, and thank you to our loyal Patreon subscribers at patreon.com/GEDBpod, where for just $1 a month, you get to vote in polls for either movies we cover or topics we cover, like 1987, and you also get to listen to bonus material. And this week, if you're a patron, you're in for some goodies. Gotta tell you that, because before this would have posted, we would have released the On the Edge of Relevance, where we talk about the recent Mortal Kombat that's on HBO Max, just hit over the weekend. You get to hear us talk about that. And shortly after this comes out, we'll also be releasing our bonus episode where we talk about WandaVision, the Disney Plus show.
Yeah, man, we marathoned through that shit for you people behind the scenes. Tonight,
yes, we
recorded 3 podcasts tonight.
This is at the end of about a 4-hour podcasting session.
Yeah, but hey, I just want to say to all our patrons, fans of the show, people who've guessed it, I might shit talk all of you a lot, and I do mean it every time I do. But I also want to say that I genuinely do appreciate and love the support that you give our show, both of us personally and everything else. We wouldn't do this, especially for as long as we've been doing it already, without you guys. I mean, we're going almost on 3 years, and that's kind of a big deal especially for podcasts. There's hundreds of thousands of podcasts out there. A lot of them don't make it to a year, and we're still going because we genuinely love doing it and we love the feedback. So thank you for all of that.
Yes, thank you all very much for that. We, of course, appreciate that. And you can send us more feedback, as I mentioned, over on Twitter and Facebook at DEDBpod. And also you can email us doubleedgeddoublebill@gmail.com, all spelled out. And, if you can't support us on the Patreon monthly, why not buy some merchandise with our logo on it over on the TeePublic ESO store? You can go ahead and buy, a cup or a t-shirt or a tote bag or anything else like that with our logo on it, so you can buy our merch. Buy our merch!
Oh, you fucker, you stole the one thing I get to do on this show.
That you complained about for the last 3 weeks that you didn't want to keep doing it.
Buy our merch! Buy our merch! See, I'm still better. I still own it. I still got it.
That's how I get the spark back into him, folks. That's how I did it.
You really did. Thank you so much. Now I really want to do this for another 3 years.
Hooray! And for more of my own individual antics, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd as @NotTheWho'sTommy. I also do some writing at both marianithomas.wordpress.com and film-cred.com.
And I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Atom. That's ATOM_OR_ADAM. Same on both. Just if you want to follow me, cool. If not, that's fine too. But if you want me to share some of your stuff, I'm more than willing to do it. And I'm also on Letterboxd at Schwanson. I know it's not the same. I could probably make that happen to where it's all the same, but I'm not going to spring for the pro account. But it's SCHWANDTSON on Letterboxd. I'm kind of getting more in depth at actually doing reviews now, which I never did before. So yeah, if you want to follow me on there, please go ahead. I'd love to read your reviews, and I'd love to follow you back.
For more of our antics, subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and other podcasting platforms. If you're listening on ESO, why not listen to all the other great shows out there? And you can also dig into the archives for shows we did even before we joined ESO over on our Podbean main feed. And nothing else, if you can't, support the show via Patreon or buy any of the merch on the ESO TeePublic store, a great way to help that's completely free is to rate, review, or share the show around to give us just a bit more visibility and get other people listening to the show. We'd appreciate it if you did.
Hook us up. We'll hook you up. Sugar High. Watermelon Sugar High. Isn't that a thing? The kid from the One Direction.
You seen this yet about this?
What is that? That Doofador? I think that's a 4-car engine.
Oh, Adam, we have to end this episode. And the way we're going to end that is doing our picking for next week, which, the summer season's starting. We're actually going to start getting movies in theaters again soon. And it's going to be including big blockbusters finally. But we decided, you know what, let's do some low-budget films. Which you want to emphasize for this, we decided on low budget, meaning $2 million or less as a budget. Which there's a lot of fun cinema that doesn't have a lot of the flash and bang of these big budget movies.
Yeah, and you know what, dude? The thing is, there are so many underseen, undersung gems of cinema that are low budget. This is so exciting for me that we're doing this.
All right, well, you have the good picks, so I can see why you're excited. Yeah. And you've assigned number between 1 and 10 for both of those. I've done the same for my bad picks, and we're each going to pick a number between 1 and 10. And whatever that gets closest to amongst the ones you've assigned the numbers, and same for mine, that ends up being the good and bad film we cover. So for your 2 good picks, Adam, I'm going to stick with the low budget angle of it. I'm going to go with number 2.
Okay, number 2 is actually the higher budget of the 2 I chose. At number 2 with a budget of $1.5 million. It's a newer movie that I know you love that I haven't seen yet. It's PG Psycho Goreman.
Yeah!
Yeah, buddy. I know. I've been wanting to see it. I haven't watched it because I knew we were going to hit it sometime. At number 9, at a budget of $60,000, I had Turbo Kid.
That's one I haven't seen.
Oh, good movie. Oh, fuck. All right. Oh, bad low budget. Jesus Christ. It's an infinite wealth of shit.
Yes.
All right, I'll go I'll go number 10.
Oh, boy. I'm so excited, Adam. This is a movie I've been waiting to find an excuse to talk about on the show. From auteur, filmmaker, Neil Breen. At number 9, I have Fateful Findings. You're goddamn right. We're covering a Neil Breen movie, finally.
I knew it was coming. Oh, I didn't. For some reason, I never pegged it for this episode, but I knew you were dying to talk about Neil Breen.
Yep.
Okay.
And you don't know who Neil Breen really is, right? You have not seen any of his films.
No, I just from talking to you and doing a little bit of Wikipedia shit, but no, not really.
Oh, I'm so excited.
All right.
To open this new corner of cinema to you, Adam, of Neil Breen. Oh. Well, at number 3, I had a movie. This might be a hot take choice, but a movie that got a lot of praise at the time that I've seen recently, and I was not a fan of, Primer.
I really liked it when I first saw it, but I agree.
It's a very confusing movie. I wouldn't say it's a very good movie.
So we have Psycho Goreman and a Neil Breen movie.
Oh, I mean, Psycho Goreman, to be fair, could also describe a Neil Breen movie to some extent, which we'll talk all about that next time. But until then, everybody, it's time to lay back in your easy chair and drink some heavy booze, if you're of age.
Peace out.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping for the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.